Welcome back to another video. So in today's episode, we are going to dig into the SC, namely the SC's fuel system. So this car got it up and running this year, and it is not quite ready to actually go out on the road to be driven around and everything, so it's been relegated to just bumping in and out of the shop. And as it's bumped in and out of the shop, well, it dropped a couple of cylinders. That is now solved, and the main culprit of the dropped cylinders was were clogged injectors. So when this car became operational again, at least was put into a running fashion, to do so required pulling the socks off of the old fuel pumps, as they were pretty well destroyed at that point in time. So the car's been running without fuel pump socks on it, which, if you guys aren't familiar with in-tank fuel pumps, those essentially act as the fuel filters. So running it unfiltered ended up getting some crap in at least one, if not multiple injectors. I was able to clear them out by applying power and ground to them over on the toolbox and physically blowing through them. But that served as kind of the impetus to go, hey, it's time to finally actually make the proper fuel system for this car, to actually build it. So that is what we are going to do. So today's episode is going to focus on mounting a few components, getting the fuel tank ready for its big boy fuel system, and doing the groundwork, setting the foundation to build hopefully the last fuel system this car will ever need. So what we have currently on this car is an old Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. It still works perfectly fine, but it definitely shows its age and its wear a bit. We have a factory fuel rail with Injector Dynamics 1700X injectors. The lines are, from the regulator to the rail, there's an old AN line here. This deal back here looks to be just the original banjo fitting with some AN line band clamped to it. And then in the tank, there currently are twin Walbro. They're probably 255 pumps. You'll have to excuse me, it's been quite a while since I've really paid attention to the fuel system on this car. The tank is a factory tank. Some aftermarket wiring right here for the twin fuel pumps. And that's about it. It's very simple, very much a factory fuel system, and it was just the bare minimum for the longest time to allow this car to actually make some power. It's been on this fuel system minus the injectors. I used to have, I think they were old RC 750cc injectors, but this fuel system allowed this car to make, I think it was 620 wheel horsepower on the old T6 turbo setup this car was on many, many years ago. So it's about due for a refresh at this point in time, and I have currently sitting in the shop some really nice components to bring this thing kind of up to snuff and up to the current standards of what I do here. So I've chosen a number of my favorite fuel system components to use on the SC's new fuel system. They are sitting right here. So to start this assortment off, we have a Radium 2JZ GE fuel rail. This is set up with number 8 ORB ports on that end, and then the two larger ports actually on the injector port side here. And it's set up that way so you can feed from both sides of the rail if you wanted to and have them return this way. We're probably just going to feed through the back side, plug these two up, and then return from the front side. But we'll see when the time actually comes to do it, how I want to do it. And essentially that's just up in the air at this point in time. Beyond the rail, we have a Welding A2040 fuel pressure regulator. We have two fuel filters. This one here, if we can see inside of it, you can see 10M for 10 micron. This one here, if we can see in, you can see 100M for 100 micron. And then rounding it off, we have a Welding DB 2025A fuel pump, which this is a 1400 horsepower capable fuel pump. So this fuel pump and pretty much the port sizes of everything else, at least on the Welding side, is a bit overkill for what the SC is going to make. The car will more than likely never make 1400 horsepower, but in having a larger pump, larger ports on all of the fuel filters, larger ports on the regulator, well, I kind of future-proof myself a little bit in case I decide to get crazy with this car in the future. I shouldn't have to remake really anything or to replace really anything, at least anything that would be very difficult to replace. This pump right here is one of the larger ones that Welding offers. It's right at the upper limit of their 1400 horsepower line, and they have larger pumps still, such as the 2345A pump, which I believe should use the same footprint and the same fastener pattern that you see on the bottom of this pump. So if this would ever need to be replaced, it should be a pretty simple swap out, if again that would ever need to happen. So what is the first order of business with this new fuel system build? Well, in order to build the new, we first need to remove the old. And that will consist of removing the old regulator, the old fuel rail, the old fuel lines, and what we are going to start with is pulling the actual fuel tank out of the back of this car. So luckily enough, the SC's, the fuel tank, is relegated to the back, to the trunk area of the car. And it should be 1 bolt, 2 bolts, 3 and 4 that will loosen it out, minus any wiring connections and minus the fill neck and things along those lines. It should come out of here pretty easily, and I'm hoping that I don't have a huge volume of fuel in this thing that will make it very heavy to get out of the car. But in order to mount the external pump, and I guess not mount it, but to have it function appropriately, we'll need to sump this tank. So somewhere on the bottom side of the tank here, I'll build a little sump section with an ORB port in it, and that will be where the new fuel pump actually draws fuel from. It'll be set up similarly to the Mark IV over here. If you see this section on the bottom side right there, I know the lighting isn't the best, but that kind of triangular wedge-shaped section right there, that is the sump for this car. It's the lowest portion, or the lowest point on the pump. You can see that's where the feed line connects to, that runs up to, again, not the best lighting, but if you can see the Welding pump on the side of the fuel cell, that on this car is the electric lift pump that feeds fuel up to the surge tank. So this fuel system on this is a little bit different, but we'll be doing at least the same initial point, or the same initial bit, with sumping this factory tank and giving myself a low point to draw fuel from so the pump will actually work appropriately. The first thing I'm going to do before I start removing any of the fuel system components is what I think is a very crucial step, and that is to remove the battery. So years ago, I was working on a buddy's 1G DSM with him, and long story short, we had a fuel combined with a spark incident, spark off the battery, and a big fire. Thankfully the fire was put out, the car is still around and still in one piece, but I want to learn from that incident and be sure that I do my due diligence and disconnect the battery first. I don't want this car to burn down, and even if this car burnt down, I don't want the rest of the shop and everything else to burn down. So I'll pull the battery first and then switch focus to actually pulling the fuel tank out of this car. The SC's fuel tank is just about ready to come out. Right now, I'm draining the last bit of fuel that was in the tank out of it. You can see a nice trickle right there. And on these cars, I'll grab my flashlight and I'll show you guys. So on these cars, if you see up in there, that piece that is loose off of the bottom that has the rubber hose running to it, you can see I cut the hose. That is the return side. And then over here, where fuel is draining out of, that is the feed side. So on these particular cars, both the inlet and the outlet from the actual fuel tank, they're both sitting on the bottom of the car, the bottom of the tank that way. On the inside of the tank, that's where all of the tube work is, and that's where it either draws or returns to the appropriate locations in the tank. I'll show you guys the inside of the tank once I get it out. It's kind of cool, kind of neat how they structured everything. But for right now, I'm going to let this drain for a bit, as I don't really feel like taking a bath in gas, and if I were to pull the two banjo bolts out on the feed side the whole way, that's exactly what would happen. So we'll let it drain the rest of the way, and then we can proceed with actually pulling this tank the rest of the way out of the car. After a few hours of work, the SC now no longer has a fuel tank in it. So, like I showed underneath of the car, this hole here and this hole here, on the right is the feed side, on the left is the return side, and all of the factory lines, like I said, they come up from the bottom, and that's how they interface with the fuel tank itself. So the fuel tank right here on the floor, I went ahead and I stripped off all bolt-on components to it. So now this is just the bare tank, and now this serves as the foundation for the modifications that I'm going to do to it. So I mentioned before a lot of the cool architecture on the inside of it. Right there, that orange piece is the basket. So that is where the factory pumps sit. If I focus the light right there, you can see there's a little outcropping that allows fuel to flow into the basket and work out that way. Close to me right here, this line that I have the light on right there, that is the factory return line. So the return comes up from the bottom of the tank and dumps right back into the basket, so that way the pump or pumps can keep a constant supply of fuel going to them. Over on this side, I believe those are the two feed lines, and then this nipple that's right front and center right there is where the pumps or pump actually hook up to and push fuel out. You can also see these perforated baffles on the inside of the tank right there to help alleviate some slosh. Over there, some more baffling, another factory line. I guess that is actually the feed line right there. And then those must be the returns over there. But pretty cool, pretty neat architecture on the inside of this fuel tank. I almost called it a fuel cell, but this fuel tank. And it's almost a shame to cut into it, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. However, not today. As you can see, maybe it's still a bit wet in there. And one of the main things that you really, really need to do if you're ever working with a fuel tank like this is to air it out. Otherwise, you can create a literal bomb right in your face as you get any sparks or anything like that, in contact with the fuel vapors, and nobody wants to burn themselves or burn a car or their shop down because of something so stupid that way. So I'll let this air out overnight, and before I actually start cutting and doing any work on this fuel tank, I'll sit it on my fan and blow air through it to really make sure that I evacuate as many of the fumes as I possibly can. So the next order of business is to go back engine bay side and start removing components there. I'm running short on time to be in the shop today, but I can still get a few things knocked out up on the engine bay side. So I'll go ahead and undo the lines going to the rail. I'll pull the fuel rail out, pull the regulator out, and then at that point in time, really the only things that will be left in the car that need to be addressed and taken out are the factory lines. I'm not going to be reusing them, so there's no point for them to still be in the car. But that will involve getting the car up in the air, undoing some shrouds and everything else. More work than I want to get into at this point in time right now. But pulling the engine bay stuff out is pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll be pretty much done minus pulling the factory lines with all of the foundational work and ready to start actually moving forward with this fuel system build. Just like that, minus the old fuel lines, the SC now has no fuel system. So many times when you are building cars, you need to move backwards in order to move forwards. And that's exactly the situation that we're in right now. This may seem daunting to some, and I'll admit that even at this point in my career, whenever you're starting fresh, there's the sheer number of options that you have as far as where things can be located, the components that you are going to use, so on and so forth. All things like that, just the sheer liberty and autonomy that you have to build whatever you want out of these things can be a little bit overwhelming at times. But the fact that all the old is out and now we have a blank slate for the new, I find that really exciting, and I can't wait to get started on this. And one little note of something that I found out that I think is pretty cool, the old fuel pressure regulator bracket. Brackets can be one of the most time-consuming portions of doing builds like this. To get them to fit right, to have the component located where you want it to be, and have the bracket look aesthetically appealing, can be a difficult balancing act from time to time. This bracket right here, I don't mind the look of it, and it served its purpose perfectly well to hold the old fuel pressure regulator. And I looked at the actual bolt holes, these lower ones that are centered in the shot right now, and I thought, I wonder if the holes on the new regulator match up to the old holes. And lucky enough, I'm not sure if you guys can see that or not, but the holes on the Welding regulator fit up perfectly to the holes on this bracket. So, minus a little bit of cleanup work that's necessary on this bracket to kind of church it up a little bit, we'll go ahead and reuse this, provided that the new regulator will fit where it needs to, as if I already have the bracket, why spend time making a new one when this one will do just fine. Alright, the SC's fuel tank is now aired out. I did the flame test with it. No explosions. So it's now time to go ahead and start figuring out how to construct this sump. So to make the sump, I stopped over at my local Lowe's and I got this piece of 22 gauge sheet metal. This will be the main constitution of the sump. And the one outstanding item for it will be, or is, a number 12 ORB weld bung. I called Jegs, they did not have any in stock that I could go pick up today, so I went ahead and ordered a couple of them from Ace Race Parts. They have nice stainless ones, and that is what we will use. Unfortunately, I don't have it on hand right now, but that won't stop me from building the sump. So the tank normally sits in the car like this. This is the top side, this is the bottom side, and the sump is going to go somewhere on this bottom section right here. This rib appears to be in the center of the tank, so that is where I'll put the bung at whenever it comes in. But I'll need to graft, or I first need to fabricate the sump, and then we'll need to cut a hole and graft it onto here. And on the inside, I'm going to leave all of the components on the inside here, the basket and all the lines and everything else, as there isn't really any reason to remove them, and that provides the opportunity in the future, if I would ever go back to a normal hanger in this car, well, the basket's still there and all of the inner workings of the tank are still there. There's nothing prohibiting me from putting a regular hanger back in it. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and move this over to the welding bench, and I can start doing some CAD, some cardboard aided design to get the sump structured and fit onto the tank and fit into the car. SC's fuel tank is ready to be welded onto it. So you can see I have this large trapezoidal hole put into the tank right here, and I took this baffle and welded it to the tank so that way it isn't just in there flopping around. The baffle, or not the baffle, but the sump is right here. I put this curved kind of anti-slosh baffle into play as well, and this guy sits on there something like so. So the only thing left to do at this point in time is to weld the new sump to the fuel tank and hopefully not catch anything on fire in the process. I went ahead and I removed this bit of fabric that was glued to the bottom of the tank right there, since I'll be welding pretty much right on the seam. So hopefully this doesn't put up any horribly noxious vapors and fumes, but point being, it's now time to weld the sump to the tank. So let's go ahead and get that knocked out. Well, the SC sump came together very well. I'm quite happy with the end result and quite happy with where the outlet of the sump is located. So it sits pretty much centered on the tank, pretty much centered in the trunk here, and that will give me a really good path to run a line over to where the pump will be housed somewhere in this area over here. So I could not be happier with the way that came out. The tank goes in and comes out of the car very easily. And the welds are certainly not the prettiest things I've ever done, but working with 22 gauge sheet metal that is way outside of my ballpark and my realm of things that I work with, my wheelhouse rather, I'm very happy with the way it came out. So I laid down root passes with regular stainless filler rod and then came back in with silicone bronze to put a cover pass on just to make sure that everything is sealed up very well. And I'm pretty confident in this at this point. The only thing outstanding is to place the number 12 ORB bung, which, like I said earlier, I had to order in. So as soon as that arrives, I can get that put into the sump. This tank will be done at that point in time, and then it will be time to clean it out, put a new coat of paint on it, and it can go back in the car for good. Well, I think with the sump knocked out on the SC's fuel tank, that's probably a good spot to end this video. So we made big progress on this thing. The sump is something that I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to accomplish it, but the end result I could not be happier about. So we're waiting on that number 12 ORB bung. As soon as it arrives, I can get it installed into the fuel cell, or the fuel tank rather, and then start figuring out the lines for this. So that won't be in this episode. Obviously, we're wrapping it up right now. But the one other point that I wanted to make is the Mark IV is all cleaned up as it is leaving to go and have its Haltech conversion completed. So I know it's been quite a while waiting for this to happen, but I went ahead and loaded up all of my Haltech boxes. You can see all that stuff there, the old super wiring schematic, so on and so forth. So this car is going up for Russ to work his magic on it, and in hopefully pretty short order, this car will be back powered by a Haltech Nexus R5, and in the interim, Russ's car is coming back here, his beautiful RSP Supra, so that way I can knock out a couple of smaller projects on it, but ones that will be pretty cool and we'll talk about in an upcoming video. But with all of that being said, before I drone on anymore, let's go ahead and wrap this up. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. In just a few days, it will be Christmas, so if you guys celebrate Christmas, I wish you a very happy, very merry one. If you don't, a very happy holiday season to you, and I hope that the year has been good to you, and I hope that you have a good holiday. The year is rapidly drawing to a close, and I have a pretty cool final video for the year that I'm currently working on, and that will release next Monday. So we have that to look forward to, end of year shenanigans and everything else, and then we start a whole new year and a blank slate for new experiences, new projects, and so on and so forth. I can't wait for it. I hope that you guys are excited as well. But before I drone on anymore, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my 15th anniversary t-shirts and hoodies. Time is of the essence if you want to get one of those for your collection. They will be discontinued come January 2025, so in just a couple of weeks. So if you want one for your collection, now's the time to do it. But if those don't speak to you, then hopefully I offer something in the future that does. But with all of that being said, that will be the end of this video, and I will see you guys in the next episode.